Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And it sounds like Xbox might have just locked down a major exclusive title from a very popular franchise. Now, there's been some speculation about this one for a while, but according to the latest information that we have, yeah, it sounds like Xbox might have just grabbed themselves a big exclusive title. That Bethesda acquisition keeps paying off, so we will talk about that one here in just a bit. And also, could Nintendo be bringing over Nintendo 64 games to Nintendo Switch Online? Well, maybe this is possible after all, so we will go over all of that as well, plus plenty more. As usual, I'll cover the entire game industry, so let's just go and jump right into things, starting off with Battlefield 2042. Now, we did talk about this yesterday, but there was a lot of rumors floating around that Battlefield 2042 was going to receive some kind of delay. This was just kind of making waves across the internet, and eventually Tom Henderson came out and said, yes, he has heard that Battlefield was going to receive a delay, though it was only going to be for a couple of weeks, contrary to some of the rumors that was going around. And well, the bad news here is that yes, Battlefield 2042 has now been confirmed to have been delayed, but the good news is that Tom Henderson was correct. This delay is not anything too major. Instead of releasing on October 22nd, Battlefield 2042 is now set for November 19th, so you're looking at about a little less than a month delay here, so that's not too bad. Yes, I know it's going to be disappointing for fans looking forward to playing Battlefield sooner rather than later, but as I always say, if a game truly needs to be delayed, you might as well just go ahead and do it, and the end result's just going to be better for it. So I don't really necessarily think that this is a bad thing per se. Now, I did note in yesterday's video that I think that if Battlefield does indeed get pushed back in November, which is now confirmed, I think that that might be a little bit worse of a release date. And a part of that is because now it's kind of sandwiched between two just behemoths of first-person shooters. You have Call of Duty Vanguard releasing on November 5th, and then you have Halo Infinite releasing on December 10th. So Battlefield is just sandwiched right between those, and we'll kind of see how that impacts Battlefield 2042. But when I started to think about it, I actually don't think it's as bad of a release date as what I originally maybe thought it was. When I started to think about it, Battlefield was set for October 22nd, so it still would have only had a couple weeks before Call of Duty release, so I don't really think it's going to make too much of a difference on whether it releases on October 22nd, or in this case now being November 19th. Something else that we talked about earlier this week was about Gran Turismo 7 possibly being an always online game. Obviously, a lot of people are really excited about Gran Turismo and kind of the return of that single-player campaign mode after Gran Turismo Sport. Gran Turismo Sport had some single-player components to it, but the main focus with that game was its online multiplayer. But here, with Gran Turismo 7 kind of returning back to form, that has a lot more people really excited to jump back in with the latest entry. The thing about all that, though, is that there seems to be some caveats when it comes to Gran Turismo's single-player campaign. PlayStation did post a big blog post about Gran Turismo 7, and it went into great detail about several different features within Gran Turismo 7, including single-player campaign features, and then right at the bottom, in fine print, of course, it says, these features require internet connection. And yeah, right away, fans were not exactly happy about this, and there was a lot of speculation that Gran Turismo 7 is an always online game. So we talked about that earlier this week, and I said that we should probably wait for confirmation before assuming that that is the case, but here's the thing. We have now got that official confirmation. In an interview with Eurogamer, the Polyphony Digital CEO had this to say. The requirement for the online connection is just to prevent cheating overall from people trying to modify the saved data, so that's the reason for the online connection. The online connection is required for the campaign mode. The only part of the game that doesn't require an online connection is the arcade mode, because that has no effect on the saved data, so that's possible. And there it is. Gran Turismo 7 is in fact an always online game outside of the arcade mode. And okay, I get it, they don't want people cheating and everything, but at the same time, anytime that you hear a single player component of the game is always online, fans are going to react to that about as well as what you would expect. Making games always online raises questions on what's going to happen if I'm not able to connect to my internet. Am I just not able to play it? And how is that fair considering it's a single-player game? And then there's also the question about the longevity of always online games. What happens 10 or 20 years from now when this game no longer is connected to the servers? Will you still be able to play Gran Turismo 7? Now, they could possibly put out a patch to fix that problem, but there's always going to be some controversy around that type of a decision. I don't know, I feel like even the reason that they're saying that this will be always online is a little questionable to say the least, but there you have it. Gran Turismo 7 is indeed an always online game, or at least outside of the arcade. Next up, let's talk about Xbox, because this sounds like they may have just locked down a major exclusive for the Xbox ecosystem. Now, this one is coming from Special Nick over on the Xbox Era podcast, and he has earned himself a reputation for leaking information over the last couple of years. He did recently accurately leak out the Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut reveal. He leaked out the God of War Ragnarok reveal at the PlayStation conference, and he's even predicted lineups for PlayStation Plus games in the past. So some fans do look at him and hold him in high regard. But per usual, anytime we talk about leaks or rumors on this channel, always take it with a grain of salt. But according to Special Nick, Indiana Jones is an Xbox ecosystem exclusive, and this would be absolutely huge if true. Now, Indiana Jones is being developed by Machine Games, which is a Bethesda studio, which means it's an Xbox studio. Something that we have talked about in the past is I think that you can pretty much by this point, for the most part, expect all Bethesda games to be exclusive to the Xbox ecosystem. Starfield, that was a big question mark for a long time. It has officially been announced as an Xbox exclusive. You have Redfall coming out next year, which is coming from Arcane Studios. That's an Xbox exclusive. When The Elder Scrolls 6 does eventually get reintroduced, that's going to be an Xbox exclusive, as is the next Doom, as is the next Fallout game. I think fans need to just kind of go ahead and accept it by this point. Bethesda was acquired for exclusive titles, and therefore all of these beloved franchises that were in the past multi-platform will now be exclusive to Xbox going forward. But there's always been one game that's already been announced that has been questionable on whether or not it will be exclusive or not, and that would be Indiana Jones. Now, I've actually openly questioned this one myself on the channel because unlike a lot of these other games, Indiana Jones is not solely owned by Bethesda and Xbox. Indiana Jones is owned by Disney, so this one is a little bit more complicated than some of the other games that's already been announced. That's why there's always been more questions when it comes to Indiana Jones and whether or not that will be Xbox exclusive or not. But according to Special Nick, this is what he had to say. I've been told Indiana Jones is full Xbox exclusive because I know a lot of people sort of assumed that based on the fact that that deal was probably done before the acquisition, it's indie, it's Disney. It'll most likely be multi-plat. But let's be honest, does Disney have a problem with exclusivity? Look at Spider-Man, look at Wolverine. He then goes on to talk about KOTOR and then says this: as far as I'm aware, indie is locked up. That's it. It's only coming to Xbox and PC. Obviously, the Xbox ecosystem. Now, obviously, keep in mind that none of this is official information, but according to this most recent leak, maybe Indiana Jones is actually an Xbox exclusive after all. I think at the very least, we absolutely can't rule out the possibility because I do think that he makes a really good point here. He does point out that Disney's already making exclusive titles with Sony. They have 3 exclusive games for Sony alone, so, I mean, it sounds like they're more than willing to do that, so yeah, Xbox could have possibly went back to renegotiate that contract and said, hey, we want Indiana Jones as an exclusive, what do we need to do to make that happen? Disney then might have worked out some kind of an agreement to have Indiana Jones be an Xbox exclusive. It certainly helps that Indiana Jones would also be coming to PC in terms of negotiation as well. At the very least, I think that you can't necessarily rule that out, but I mean, if this is true, this is a big get for Xbox. Indiana Jones is a very popular franchise with some dedicated fans, and with Machine Games, which is a talented studio working on Indiana Jones, this could possibly be a big hit when it does eventually release. We've seen Uncharted in the game industry and how phenomenal those games are, and Uncharted is it's kind of inspired by Indiana Jones. So here, if Indiana Jones is done right, I mean, you could have a fantastic game on your hands. We'll, of course, see how all this plays out, but that Bethesda acquisition keeps paying off for Xbox. Not only has Starfield and Redfall already been announced as exclusives, but yeah, the Elder Scrolls, Doom, and now very possibly Indiana Jones could also end up being exclusives in the future as well. There's definitely a reason that Bethesda acquisition kind of impacted the industry the way it did. Let me know what you think about all this, though. Do you think Indiana Jones will indeed be an Xbox exclusive or not? Let me know. Moving on, we also got some things happening over in Nintendo World. This once again is linked to Nintendo Switch Online. There's been a lot of speculation here recently on what platforms will be coming over to Nintendo Switch Online. Of course, Eurogamer earlier this month did say that they had heard that Game Boy and Game Boy Color games was indeed coming over to Nintendo Switch Online. But they've also been hearing that other platforms is possibly on the way as well. And okay, that's very exciting, but which platforms exactly are we talking about? Well, according to the insider Nate Drake, he had this to say. Eurogamer went one step further, having noted that additional platforms will also be added to Nintendo Switch Online in the future. And today, I would like to add to that. Yes, that information is accurate, and one of the platforms that will be coming to the Nintendo Switch Online in the future is the revolutionary Nintendo 64. Now, once again, this is yet another rumor, and he does go on to speculate that if this does indeed happen, as he says, then Nintendo could possibly introduce a premium subscription service where you have to spend extra money to get these Nintendo 64 games. Honestly, I could see Nintendo doing something like that, but I think that there's a little bit more to this rumor than just a simple insider saying that this will happen. If you start to look at things, Nintendo's already gotten a Nintendo 64 emulator working on the Switch, and I mean, because we saw that with Mario 64. It was well documented that that was running on a Nintendo 64 emulator, so we know that they've already gotten something like that working on the Switch, and they could very well possibly bring over Nintendo 64 games to Nintendo Switch Online. But then to just kind of add to that, something else happened today that makes it sound like Nintendo's definitely doing something with Nintendo Switch Online. See, what's happening here is that a new FCC application suggests that a brand new Nintendo Switch controller may very well be in development and be revealed soon. As to how long it will be before they officially reveal this kind of remains to be seen, but one thing that stands out about this controller is the model name being HAC-043, which is interesting because, well, the wireless Super Nintendo controller was HAC-042. And because of that, there's some speculation that this will be a new controller for Nintendo Switch Online. Now, with rumors being pretty strong for Game Boy and Game Boy Color, okay, that's one thing, but they don't really have a controller, so what would be the next controller that they could release for Nintendo Switch Online? And I think Nintendo 64 is going to be that console that a lot of people are immediately going to think about. Does this necessarily confirm anything? Absolutely not, but it definitely puts more fuel in the fire that maybe Nintendo is, after all, doing something with Nintendo Switch Online. Whatever the case may be, though, if Nintendo does decide to bring more platforms to Nintendo Switch Online, I just hope that they do a better job at choosing what games to put into that catalog, because they have not done a good job with that here in the last year or so. So that's where I really hope that they improve. If they do bring Game Boy Color, and Nintendo 64 games over to Nintendo Switch Online, at least bring out the games that fans really want to see. I mean, where's games like Earthbound? We're still waiting on games like that. Regardless, I do hope that all this ends up being something, because, you know, the N64, I mean, it's one of my favorite consoles of all time, and I would love to see some games like that head over to the Switch. I think that would be awesome. And, I mean, if they have a Nintendo 64 wireless controller, yeah, I'm absolutely going to buy that. But, yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you like to see Nintendo 64 games head over to the Switch? Next up, we do have one more topic to go over here just real quick, and that is for Tales of Arise. Tales of Arise did release on September 10th, and since this game is released, there has been a lot of excitement for this particular title. Not only is Tales of Arise one of the best rated games for the entire year, but it's also been breaking franchise records over on Steam. Tales of Arise did end up passing 45,000 concurrent players on Steam, which apparently is a higher peak than all the other Tales of games combined. That's pretty crazy all on its own, but now it's also become the fastest selling Tales of game in the franchise. It has officially eclipsed 1 million copies sold worldwide, which is absolutely fantastic. The thing about the Tales of games is this has been a long-running franchise, and they've been hit and miss over the years. Tales of Vesperia has been among my favorites, and really just in terms of JRPGs as a whole. But, some of the Tales of games, they have been a little bit just average, I guess I would say at best. But with Tales of Arise, it seems like they went back to the drawing boards here. They took a little bit of extra time to make this game. They increased its production values dramatically. And this game now looks like a big AAA style of game. And it looks like that has officially paid off. The fact that it is now the fastest selling Tales of game ever, this could end up being the big breakout hit that the Tales of franchise needed. And you know what? It's well-deserved. There's a reason that fans and critics are both loving this game so much, and if you haven't tried it already, and if you do like JRPGs, go check out Tales of Arise. Now, speaking of JRPGs, let's just go and take a look at the poll of the day. There has been that NVIDIA GeForce leak been going around, and in that leak, Final Fantasy IX Remake was spotted, so it kind of got me wondering, if Square Enix remakes another Final Fantasy game, which entry would you prefer it be? And well, it sounds like a lot of you all do want that NVIDIA GeForce Now leak to be true, because 40% of you voted for Final Fantasy IX. And okay, Final Fantasy IX is a great overall game. I think the thing about Final Fantasy IX is that it just seems like most of the Final Fantasy fan base seems to really like Final Fantasy IX, which, that's kind of a testament to how good this game is, because if you know anything about the Final Fantasy fan base, they can be a little bit passionate about which ones are good and which ones are not. It just feels like with a lot of these Final Fantasy entries, a large part of the fan base just doesn't agree with one another. But it seems like almost everybody can universally agree that Final Fantasy IX is a good game. It's got good combat, it's got a good world, the characters are lovable and charming, and it really is the whole package. It's got a bit of a different art style to it, and I would like to see how that would translate to a remake. But I think that if you look back at that game, the art style, it ages pretty well in my honest opinion. But yeah, I think that you can make a pretty good remake with Final Fantasy IX. And, like you all, I do hope that that remake is true from the NVIDIA GeForce Now leak. However, with them making a Final Fantasy animation, I do wonder if that's the direction that Square Enix decided to take instead. Yeah, I would hope that they would make a game rather than an animation, but we'll see how all that plays out. If I were to choose a single entry to remake here, though, I'd probably go with Final Fantasy VI. It's not necessarily my favorite. My favorite out of these games would be Final Fantasy VIII, but I think Final Fantasy VI could use a remake the most. Sure, its pixel art has aged incredibly well over all these years, but in terms of its story, they could do so much more with modern visuals. There are some pretty heavy themes when it comes to Final Fantasy VI, and I just think that having it as a modern game, you're talking about an epic overall story. So that's why I'd probably take Final Fantasy VI, but I'm more than okay with a Final Fantasy IX remake as well. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget about notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.